Hi, this is Jennifer Hartley, and I am the Education Program Coordinator for the Botanical Society of America. I'm also the Program Supervisor and Website Administrator for the Planting Science Program. And I'm recording this in March of 2023, and we have a number of new teachers and new scientist mentors that are coming on board right now. And with that in mind, recognizing that we have kind of an older planting science introduction, I wanted to kind of create just a real quick video that talks through an updated version of what planting science is, how it works, what we're trying to accomplish, all of that. This is not going to be like a cinematic masterpiece or anything. I am just kind of going through some slides that I typically use to introduce the program to teachers. But if you are one of our incoming teachers, or you're a teacher that's just curious about what's going on, or for the matter, if you're a scientist that's curious about mentoring or thinking about taking part in that, this is going to give you a lot of the backstory and a glimpse into what an actual project looks like when we go through it. So just for some context, planting science has been around since 2005. We regularly have done some efficacy research into what we do to make sure that it actually works for students, and it does. So I'll show you a little bit about that. And like I said, I'm also going to talk a little bit about the rationale that backs planting science specifically, because it bears noting that while mentoring is a kind of a universal good and known to be a universal good in lots of different sciences, but also lots of different careers as a whole. Plant science in particular is in great need of as much exposure as possible, especially with students. So that's one reason why we're kind of unique in the way that we go about things. But in its simplest form, planting science is a program that combines plant science inquiry activities in the classroom with mentoring with a real scientist online. So again, we're going to talk through the rationale behind that and also how we do it. And I'll show you an example so you can see what it looks like. One of the things when I go talk to teachers about this, and scientists have probably run into this before, is I give them this slide and I say, what is the correct response to this prompt? Some of them will go ahead and say hedgehog, but as you saw me accidentally click forward, the correct response should be which organism are we talking about? And that can be kind of a head game for people. They have a hard time seeing plants in a picture like this, even recognizing that that's an organism. And we know that this is a documented phenomenon. But in fact, there are 4 organisms that are identifiable in this picture. There's probably more in the stuff that isn't identifiable. But we obviously have a hedgehog, which is what usually draws attention. But we also have moss, we have fescue grass, and we have a celandine poppy as well. So why do we skip past that? Well, in the science realm, we've come to call this plant awareness disparity. It is the tendency of human beings in some usually developed cultures to ignore plant species in their environment. And I guess I wouldn't say that we even ignore it. We just tend to dismiss it as background. We just sort of relegate it to scenery. And that's not great. But the reason why we do that isn't hard to figure out, especially, living in a city in the United States. Most of my life, even, is inside, and I deal with plants quite a lot. I will wake up in my house, I will get in my car, I will go to my office, and I will work, and then I'll go back to my car, and then I'll go back to my house. In addition to that, most people in the United States actually don't have a very hands on view of where food comes from. Some people do still have gardens in their backyard but it's more of a hobby than a need here for most people. Now, obviously, we have a whole agricultural societies out there that, they are providing the food for those of us that aren't providing it for ourselves. But for many students and for many families, our food comes from the supermarket. So we don't have to be as in touch with the trees that they come from, the crops that grow them, that sort of thing. And so as a result, in our day-to-day lives, aside from eating what we eat, we really don't have a lot of incidental contact with plants. We don't have to walk outside to go places to where we want to go. We don't have to go pick our food or forage or that sort of thing. So for most people in the United States, from about like the 1950s on, uh, the way that most people got acquainted with plants was playing outside during childhood. And even as recently as like the 1980s or so, children's programming on television, which was at that point kind of the big thing that would keep kids indoors when they could be outside playing, that was restricted to certain times of day, certain channels, and certain days. Like Saturday morning cartoons, for example. The rest of the time would be adult programming. Kids really weren't interested in that, so they'd go outside and find their friends and play. In addition, they were allowed to do that. In our culture, it was completely acceptable for kids to be outside roaming around in a big pack, parents not necessarily clear on exactly where they were, probably having faith that they were in the neighborhood somewhere. But that unstructured time outdoors meant that there was lots of time to notice things, to investigate things on their own terms, to develop interest in things, to move on to other things. And because of that, a lot of people that are currently of the Gen X generation have a much better relationship with plants than, say, millennials and Gen Z do. For beginning in about the mid 90s, children, the fear culture kind of came in that said that children unsupervised outside was very dangerous. And there were good reasons for that. But that means that most children that grew up in the 90s and 2000s typically spent time outside in curated activities like outdoor sports. They typically had an adult on hand kind of directing them and maybe even cautioning them away from plants. And they themselves didn't get a very good introduction to that. They didn't have the opportunity to just kind of fool around outside and discover what they could discover. Also, of course, technology is a big part of their lives, and there are many more inducements now. There's pretty much 24-hour a day children's programming available on all different media at all times. There is, lots of video games and other indoor kind of sources of entertainment that earlier generations didn't have. So, as a whole, our society is much less connected. Now, that would be kind of okay if it wasn't for the fact that our biology and other life science courses in school also don't fill the need. So, this is just a sampling of biology textbooks, textbook covers. And this is typical. Like, I didn't search for textbook covers with animals on them. I specifically just looked for biology textbook, and this is what comes up. So it's very rare to find a biology textbook that actually shows a plant on the cover. Usually it'll show an animal and a plant. That's not an accident. Animals are charismatic. Kids understand animals, they like animals. More kids have a favorite animal than they have a favorite plant. We get all that. But one of our colleagues, a researcher named Dr. Gordon Uno, has done research into the content within our life science curricula and has found that even when the topic being discussed could be and arguably should be taught in terms of how plants behave or plant tissues or whatever, we typically will not. It will still double down on animals because animals are efficient and kids relate to them more easily. So, what that means then is that we have whole generations of kids growing up with very little, very nominal intersection with plants at all. And so that's something planting science seeks to address. Now, the planting science program understands that animals are important too. So please don't think that we don't think animal science matters. However, plant science does matter because, again, 100% of us rely on plants for the obvious things like food and oxygen. But as we progress further into our need to navigate global climate change, carbon dioxide capture is a pretty big deal. And if we don't have a good understanding of how plants work, we can't leverage them the way we need to in order to kind of get ourselves out of the hole we're in. So it is important that as we move forward, that we have people who understand plants, that like plants, that are interested in studying this stuff, so that we can continue to develop our understanding of how they work and how we can maybe use them to address some of the issues that we're facing. But we're not really doing that. So this is again according to Uno's research, between 1984 and 1991, 1985 and 1990 rather, 0% of college students reported botany as a major. Now, that's not surprising. Up until probably maybe the 70s, maybe a number of prominent universities actually had a separate botany department. And as the numbers of students dwindled, those got absorbed into sort of the more general biology, especially at the undergraduate level. So that's fine, except that, again, even at the college level, we will often use animals for examples for content that we're discussing instead of plants. So the plant stuff just kind of gets lost in the biology degrees in some cases. Now, most schools do have botany specific classes. And then when you get to the graduate level, of course, there's, that's where you can find botany programs again. But with that in mind, if kids aren't coming in with that and their first exposure to it is in college, we're sort of missing some opportunities to engage kids. And then again, as we look ahead to the future at the need for people who are knowledgeable about plants, who are interested in researching them, who have a pretty good idea of how they function, um, we need more of those, not less. But based on what the trends right now, we're expecting to see 44% increase in the number of job vacancies. That's not new jobs that are being created that we don't have people to fill. That's existing jobs that are going to fall back because we are not putting out enough plant science majors, plant science graduates to fill the positions that are the existing botanists and agriculturists and all that are aging out of. So just important to keep that in mind. We don't actually expect every student who goes through planting science will decide to go on and become a plant researcher as their future career, but at least if you're using this in your classroom, you're giving them an opportunity to interact with plants and hopefully addressing that situation. The investigation themes that we offer are aligned with state standards, but they address a variety of topics. And they're also meant to be kind of used as supplemental to whatever curriculum you're using in the classroom. So for example, if you are a biology teacher and you're discussing tissues and cell types and organs and that, the most likely way of presenting that is to talk about it in terms of human physiology. That's understandable, but you could also use the celery challenge to address the plant side of that, because this theme deals with different types of cell tissues and how they behave in plants. So that's the idea. It's a nice selection, and all the materials are freely downloadable on our website for teachers. So all you have to do is create an account, and you can go and take a look at those. The typical run of show for them is what we'd call a guided inquiry. This is a constructivist kind of idea that has been gaining popularity in the United States since about the 90s. In which you kind of build opportunities within your science curriculum for students to make decisions on their own about what they want to learn about. So the idea here is that in the beginning of the unit, or when you introduce the activity, there's usually some kind of whole class experience that just opens up the topic for discussion and exploration. So in some cases, that might be like a kind of splashy demonstration that you might do in class. Could be a discussion that you have based on an article or a video. It could also be a series of small activities that just kind of touch on some of the topics that we're talking about. But the idea there is that the class as a whole participates together. The teacher does lead this activity. And then after it's done, you have a conversation as a class about, like, well, so what did we figure out, and what are some things that we would like to know more about based on what we just saw. And from there, the students are usually broken out into smaller groups. In planting science, we recommend groups of about 3 to 5 students. So what's analogous to a fairly typical lab group. And each one of those groups will then choose a question that they want to explore together. They will go through all the steps of the scientific process. So basically, if you think of like a science fair project similar to that, they will pick a question, they will do some research on it, they will formulate a hypothesis, they will create, they'll decide what they're going to measure, they'll set up their experiment, they will collect their data, make their observations, analyze it, and then come back with their conclusion. And so they will do all that kind of on their own, with their teacher acting as a facilitator. So the teacher provides the materials, the teacher is kind of walking around answering questions or providing suggestions as a mentor. And then at the end of it all, when they're done, they will present their results to the class in some fashion. Some teachers will have them make a slideshow, some will make a poster, some might have them do presentations in the front of the room. It really just depends on your kid's age level and what makes sense for your students. And then there will be kind of a synthesis reconvening conversation at the end where the teacher will lead this to help them take all these little disparate things that each group found out and tie it back into the original content, so that everybody goes away with an accurate and complete understanding of whatever the topic was. So now, if you are familiar with the next generation science standards, the DCIs, I mean, these are broken out by the three chunks of the three prong stool of the next gen science standards. That doesn't mean that you're not going to talk about your discrete content here or here. It just means that this is where the focus is. So during their inquiry, that's when they're really going into those science and engineering processes. And then in the reconvening is when you can really nail home the cross-cutting concepts, the ones where you're tying it to other areas of science or other things that they're studying, stuff that has gone on in the past. You can make those patterns clear there. So it's a really nice, complete kind of a thing, kind of hits all the major points. And it's really good to use in the classroom. But now this will help us, if you're doing this about plants, you're going to address that plant issue and get kids looking at and thinking about plants more. But there is another situation that planting science also seeks to get at, and that's this one. So for about 30 years now, 40 years now, there has been a protocol that has been commonly used with science students to get a better sense of how they feel about science as a career. And that's called the Draw a Scientist test. And it's fairly simple. Like, you could do this with your kids anytime. You could just give them a piece of paper and say, okay, I'd like everyone to draw a scientist doing science, and then give them 15, 20 minutes to sketch. And this can be done for students as young as kindergarten all the way up through high school. When the researchers do it, typically what they'll do is they will then meet with the students one-on-one and ask them to talk them through what decisions they made in their drawing. So I see you've drawn this. Can you tell me more about what you were thinking? And then there's a sort of a scoring protocol for the drawing itself and also for the conversation that happened afterwards. And basically what we're looking for are, what are the patterns that we notice, and whether the indicators that we're seeing are kind of more positive or are they more negative. So as you can see here, this is fairly common. I think these were drawn from a 2018 study, and as you can see, there's some definite themes, right? So as they've examined a lot of these, the themes that tend to emerge is that our scientists are typically male. They are also typically white and middle-aged, as you see down here. They are typically portrayed indoors in a lab doing something secret or potentially dangerous. So explosions are common. Light bulbs manifest two ways. Either the scientist is having a great idea and there's a light bulb over their head to show that they're thinking hard, or the light bulb is hanging from the ceiling to show they're working like in a dungeony basement back environment. So a lot of them, though, really don't seem very positive. Like, some kids will say, oh, well, I know that scientists do other things, but this is the scientist that I thought of. The other thing I will say too is that in more recent, like in the last probably 2 or 3 years, some more recent research that's come out has shown more females showing up, which is good. Not as many other shades of diversity are we seeing, but we're definitely seeing more women. So that's good to see. But it's really not surprising that students feel this way or this is what they go to, because very few of them actually have a scientist in their lives, somebody that they can actually talk to that would show them what it's like to be a scientist. And so they're getting their stereotypes from popular media. So they're seeing Doc Brown in their head, or Dr. Doofenshmirtz. So, which again are not scientists. I mean, they're engineers, but that's another thing. So this is what we come to, and we really want to get at that too. So the way we deal with that is, in addition to providing great resources for a very immersive plant-based instructional experience, we also then couple that with mentors. So we have mentors across the world that are willing to volunteer their time and work with students. And each one of those is assigned to one of the groups. So you'll notice it's not one mentor working with the whole class. It is each small group has their own mentor who is communicating with them online. So let me show you what that looks like real quick. I'm going to come here to DMS Gray's group. This is one from fall of 2022. So this one's been archived, so it looks a little different than a live one would look. But this teacher has worked with us quite a bit, and her projects are listed here on her site. We do ask our teachers to kind of give our mentors an idea of what their outcomes are and things like that. There is a forum here that teachers can use to communicate with their mentors, as well as other resources here. But the projects are listed here, and the students are actually only members of the projects. So they can only see their project page to which they've been assigned. And as you can see, we let the students within reason, rename their group to whatever they want. Some of them are very funny and cute. Um, and also put up a picture to help define themselves, et cetera, et cetera. Now I've opened this one over here to show you what it looks like as they're going through it. So the project page, this will not appear until after it's over if the project has been nominated for a Star Project Award. That's kind of like a science fair that we hold at the very end of each session to select like the top projects and send prizes to the kids. But this group was nominated, as you can see, and you can read here if you want to pause the video what they were nominated for. But it's a pretty good typical exemplar of what a project should look like. So at the top here, we have these fields, which will look familiar as the parts of the scientific method here. We don't necessarily provide a place for them to put all their observations because that should be evident in the feed below. Down here where it says updates, there is a very long feed, and there all the messages are in reverse order so that the most recent messages are at the top. But if you scroll down through it, you can track backwards through the progress of this conversation. And you'll notice that the kids, when they post, always show up as just a first name. This is how we comply with COPPA and FERPA. The kids use an anonymous login. They do not use their school email to log in. They are given like a PS number, username and password, and only their first name is in the system. The one that has a last name here, this is the mentor. This is Katie Becklin. And then occasionally there is a post from the teacher too. So like there's one. So last names are only the adults. First names only are the kids. And this is pretty common in that there's one or two kids are doing most of the posting for the group. But as you go all the way to the bottom, you can see that we had a period where we were introducing ourselves. Students introduced themselves. And then as they went along, they shared with their mentor some of the questions that they were thinking about. And then the mentor responded to that, gave them some advice. And all of this is happening. You can kind of see this is all happening in one day. So it does move along fairly quickly. Students can upload photos of what they're doing so that their mentor can more easily visualize what their project setup is. As they make observations, they will share that with their mentor too, and then the mentor will ring in on it and give them some suggestions perhaps. We also encourage our mentors to talk a little bit about their own research and share some of that with the kids so the kids have a sense of who they are as a person. And then here at the end, they made a poster that they shared with her as well so that she could see how things came out. And then, of course, there's all the thank yous and goodbyes. So it's a really fun, easy way for our scientists to get some mentoring experience and also to kind of practice talking at street level about these topics. But it's also, of course, a great experience for the students to have this one person that's focused on them and able to interact with them on a regular basis. So, on the back end, it looks a lot more complicated, but mainly, if you look at this, it's really not. The teacher will apply and will work with me to make sure that the group is set up the way they want, with the correct number of groups and the correct number of project teams, the correct number of mentors, etc. We also assign to them a scientist who has applied to be part of our master plant science team. This person is basically the mentor for the teacher. This is the person that the teacher can talk to give updates about what's going on in the classroom. The liaison is responsible for recruiting mentors and assigning them to the groups, and also for checking in to make sure that all the mentors are in fact posting. It bears noting that all of our mentors are researchers in their own right. Some of them are students, some of them are faculty members, and so they are teaching and doing research alongside this. So it's not uncommon for someone to come up with a opportunity to go in the field that comes out of nowhere. So then the liaison may have to step in and be a mentor as well. And that happens. That's what they're for. So the teacher's job, of course, is to be engaging with the students in the classroom, making sure they're doing their activities, giving them time to log in and post to their mentors. The liaison's job is to be just sort of monitoring the conversations to make sure everybody's moving along, checking in with mentors that seem kind of pokey to see if there's something keeping them from posting or if they need to step in and take over for a while the mentor has to be away. And so even though this looks very complicated, it's a really nice organized setup. Okay. If you ever have any questions about what each role does, let us know and we'll be happy to walk you through it. The scientists that work with us are volunteers. I think that's important to note. They are professors, researchers, postdocs, PhD candidates, graduate students, all of them working in some aspect of plant science. Many are members of one of our professional science partner organizations. These they do help us to recruit. Um, they are also affiliated with universities and research laboratories all over the world, which means your students could be mentored by, say, a researcher in India. That's they will always speak English. They know that that's kind of a requirement, but it may be worth keeping that in mind if you might have a mentor who's a little pokier about responding because they're in a completely different time zone. So just keep that in mind. And also, just for our mentors, the benefit tends to be that again they get some practice bringing their science to street level, talking to students and helping them understand what's going on. But it also is kind of a nice CV builder for them, shows that they have some mentoring background. That's very important. And they are wonderful people. So please, if you're a teacher and you're working with us, be patient with your mentors. Understand that they mean well and they're doing the best they can, but they are very busy just like you are. If you are a mentor aspiring to take part, please keep in mind that you are working with kids. And so it's important to always be as positive as possible. We want to encourage our mentors to be real people with the students they're working with. That means that sharing anything that you feel comfortable sharing in public. There are no interactions on our platform that take place privately between students and their mentors. Everything that goes on between students and mentors takes place in that feed. Students are not given their mentor's email address, and there is no way to send like private messages through the system. So everything is visible to the teacher. But also, so you don't have to worry that there's anything strange going on behind the scenes, teachers, but scientists too. Don't feel that you have to be pressured to share anything really intimate, but to the extent to which you can let the students see what your life is like, that you're a real person, etc., do that, because that also feeds to that desire to help students see scientists as real people. When students are explaining what they're doing, a lot of times they're not good at it. They're learning how to use the language too. So we encourage our mentors to ask students to explain their thinking. Prompting them to articulate their process really helps them figure out how to express it in a way that makes sense. When they try, even if it doesn't make sense, validate the effort. Say, well, that was a good, yeah, okay, I can kind of see what you're saying. Try to be as positive as possible. When they ask questions like, what happens if I add this to seeds? It may be tempting just to give an answer, but it would be better to tell them a little bit, but give them a strategy to find the answer on their own. That can include things like suggesting websites that they could maybe check out, or making a suggestion for how they could set up their project. The only thing about advice about the project is to remember that they may be a little limited on time or space or materials. So try to avoid giving direct instructions for how they should set it up, and instead give them some pointers instead. If you want to pause right now, this is a really nice interaction with Alex and Elizabeth Scott, who's one of our mentors and MPS team members. It's a good example of some of those strategies unfolding. Just some other important points to note about the program. We do hold 2 sessions a year, one that runs from mid-September to November and the other that runs from mid-February to April. Teachers who have accounts on our platform will receive an email that tells them when the applications are open so they can get those applications in quickly. Again, every teacher who applies is assigned a scientist liaison that can be their point person when dealing with the mentors. And students do not use their last names on the platform at all. We try to avoid any identifying information for students besides their first name or even a nickname. Mentors are recruited through the system and assigned to each team. So if you're a scientist and you're thinking about joining the Master Plant Science team, the recruiting process there's no cold calling. It's mainly going through the directory of who's available and selecting the most appropriate candidates. It's super easy and wonderfully programmed, actually. It's one of my favorite parts of our website. And does it work? So we do try to engage in efficacy training as often as we can, or efficacy research as often as we can. So in 2016-2017, we partnered with BSCS and the University of Colorado Springs to sort of dig into this question of how whether it's accomplishing what we wanted it to accomplish. And so we looked at two things. Do students who go through the planting science program come away with a better understanding of the content that was discussed? And do students who go through the planting science program come away with a better understanding and impression of who scientists are than those who don't? And so we had two groups of teachers. We had a control group that just taught like normal. And then we had another group that used planting science to teach the same material. And we used the What Works Clearinghouse protocols for evaluating the efficacy of that, and found that in both, it just, I don't know why it was the same, but there was a positive shift of 11 points in both of those domains. So that was very exciting and promising. The research that we're about to do in fall of 2023 is actually a replication of that. So we're excited to be able to come back and add to that body of research, because these kind of partnerships are rare and the research is a little sparse. So we're happy to contribute to it. And this is just a really nice display of all of our partners. So Planting Science is free to teachers. We do not charge them to be a part of it. And part of the reason for that is because we are so well supported by the NSF and by a lot of these wonderful, wonderful societies that help us with recruitment, with curriculum support, with Johnny Seeds regularly donates seeds to us to send to teachers, that sort of thing. So if you are affiliated with anyone that you think would be a good additional partner, we would love to talk to you. Please feel free to reach out to us. But if you have any other questions as well, please know that you can always find us at psteam@plantingscience.org. That's psteam@plantingscience.org. Please feel free to reach out to me with questions, comments, concerns, anything you need to talk about. I would love to hear from you. So that wraps this up. Thank you so much. And we really hope to see you in the platform.